They say blood is thicker than water, but I've learned that sometimes blood can cut deeper than any blade. My name is Dolores Mayfield, and this is the story of how my own son tried to steal my life from me, and how I fought back to reclaim everything that was rightfully mine. I suppose it started with a simple fainting spell. My age, these things happen. The body betrays you in small ways, reminding you that time is not infinite. But what I didn't know was that this moment of weakness would become the weapon my son Jason would use against me, the key he'd turn to lock me away and steal everything I'd worked for my entire life. The morning I fainted, I was tending to my roses in the front garden. These weren't just any roses. They were the David Austin varieties I'd cultivated for over 20 years, each bush planted with love and maintained with a kind of dedication that only comes from understanding that beauty requires both patience and persistence. The irony wasn't lost on me later that roses grow best when they're pruned, when the dead wood is cut away to make room for new growth. Sometimes the most beautiful things come from the harshest cuts. I remember feeling dizzy as I bent to check the soil moisture around my prized Abraham Darby bush. The world tilted, colors blurred, and the next thing I knew, I was lying on the grass with my neighbor Mrs. Patterson hovering over me. Her face creased with worry. She'd called an ambulance, and within minutes, Jason arrived with his wife Danielle in tow. I should have recognized the look in their eyes then. Not concern but calculation. While the paramedics checked my vitals and determined I was fine, just dehydrated and perhaps a bit overwhelmed by the heat, I watched Jason and Danielle exchange glances. Quick, meaningful looks that spoke of conversations I hadn't been privy to, plans that had been forming in the shadows of my kitchen while I served them Sunday dinners and birthday cakes. "Mom, we've been talking," Jason said as the ambulance pulled away. "Maybe it's time we considered some additional support for you." Additional support. The phrase was so clinical, so carefully chosen. Not help, support. As if I were a crumbling foundation that needed reinforcement rather than a human being who'd simply had a dizzy spell on a hot day. "I'm fine, Jason. It was just the heat. You know how I get when I work too long in the garden without taking breaks." But Danielle stepped forward then, her voice honey-sweet with false concern. "Dolores, we love you so much, and we just want what's best for you. There's this lovely place, Sunset Manor, and they have wonderful programs for seniors. Think of it as a vacation, just for a week or two while you recover." Vacation. As if being separated from my home, my garden, my life, could ever be described as something pleasant and voluntary. I'd raised Jason alone after his father died when he was just 12. Worked 2 jobs to put him through college, sacrificed my own dreams so he could build his. I'd never remarried, never put my own happiness before his needs. Every decision I made was filtered through one question: what's best for Jason? Now, standing in my own driveway beside the roses I'd nurtured for decades, I realized that Jason had never learned to ask that question about anyone but himself. "I don't need a vacation," I said firmly. "I need to water my roses and finish the laundry and call Mrs. Peterson about the church fundraiser next week." But Jason wasn't listening. He was already walking toward my front door, already acting as if the decision had been made without me. "Come on, Mom. Let's get you packed. Just a few things, you won't need much." The speed of it all should have been my first warning. The way they'd appeared so quickly, the way they had brochures for Sunset Manor already in Danielle's purse, the way they spoke about my life as if it were a problem to be solved rather than an existence to be lived. But I was tired, shaken by the fainting spell, and still operating under the assumption that my son loved me enough to consider my wishes. I packed a small suitcase, pajamas, a few changes of clothes, my reading glasses, and a photo of Jason's father. I thought I'd be home in a week, maybe less. I thought this was temporary, a brief interruption in my routine that would end with me back in my kitchen, looking out at my garden, planning next season's plantings. Sunset Manor was nothing like the brochures. Oh, it was clean enough, and the staff seemed competent, but it had that institutional smell. Disinfectant masking something sadder and more permanent. The activities room where they'd shown me cheerful seniors playing bingo and painting watercolors was empty when we arrived. The common areas where supposedly vibrant community life flourished were populated by vacant-eyed residents parked in wheelchairs, staring at a television none of them seemed to be watching. "It's just temporary," I told myself as Jason signed paperwork at the front desk. "Just until I feel stronger." But as I watched him sign document after document, I began to feel a creeping unease. Why was there so much paperwork for a temporary stay? Why did the administrator keep referring to long-term care options and family decision-making? "Jason," I called out, but he was deep in conversation with Danielle and the administrator, their voices low and serious. When he finally came over to me, his smile was too bright, too forced. "All set, Mom. They're going to take great care of you here. When will you pick me up? We'll see how you're feeling in a few days." Few days became a week. A week became 2 weeks. Every time I called Jason, he had excuses. Work was busy. Danielle wasn't feeling well. The house needed some repairs. It wouldn't be safe for me to come back until they were finished. It was during the 3rd week that I tried to call my bank to check on my accounts and was told that my access had been restricted. There was a power of attorney on file, they said. All inquiries needed to go through Jason Mayfield. Power of attorney. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. When had I signed a power of attorney? I racked my brain trying to remember, and then it came to me. Those documents Jason had me sign, just in case something happened. He'd presented them as a safety measure, nothing more. Just paperwork to make sure he could help me if I ever needed it. "It's not active," he'd assured me then. "It's just there if we ever need it." But clearly it was very much active now. I demanded to see the administrator, Mrs. Henderson, a woman with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to maintain any illusions about family loyalty. "Mrs. Mayfield, your son has legal authority to make decisions about your care. The power of attorney you signed gives him that right. But I'm competent. I can make my own decisions." She looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "That's not for me to determine. Your son has provided medical documentation that supports his decision to place you in our care." Medical documentation. What medical documentation? The fainting spell that had lasted all of 30 seconds. The clean bill of health I'd received from the emergency room. That night, I lay in the narrow bed in my shared room, shared with a woman named Agnes who spent most of her time calling for her daughter who never came, and I began to understand the full scope of what had been done to me. This wasn't temporary care. This wasn't a vacation or a recovery period. This was imprisonment, carefully orchestrated and legally sanctioned. I thought about my house, standing empty or perhaps not empty at all. Were Jason and Danielle living there now? Had they moved in the moment I was gone? I thought about my roses, probably dying without proper care. I thought about my bank accounts, my investments, my car. All the pieces of independence that I'd spent a lifetime building, now controlled by someone else. The rage that built in me during those first weeks at Sunset Manor was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't the hot anger of a moment. It was cold, calculating, and patient. It was the anger of someone who had been underestimated, dismissed, and discarded. It was the anger of a woman who had sacrificed everything for her child, only to discover that he saw her not as a person but as an asset to be managed. But anger alone wouldn't get me out of there. I needed a plan and I needed help. The help came in the form of Monica Reeves, an attorney who specialized in elder law. I'd heard about her from another resident whose granddaughter had successfully challenged a similar situation. Getting in touch with her required patience and cunning. My phone calls were monitored, my visitors were screened, and my mail was reviewed before it reached me. But I'd always been resourceful. During a group outing to the local library, one of the few activities I was allowed to participate in unsupervised, I used a public computer to research Monica's firm and sent an email from an account I created on the spot. I explained my situation carefully, factually, without the emotional weight that might make me seem unstable or confused. Monica called me back within 2 days, and what she told me confirmed my worst fears and my best hopes. "Mrs. Mayfield, based on what you've described, there are several legal issues here. First, the power of attorney should not have become active without a formal determination of incapacity. Second, if you were placed in care under false pretenses, that could constitute elder abuse. Third, if your son is using your assets without proper documentation and oversight, that could be financial exploitation. Elder abuse, financial exploitation. The clinical terms for what felt like the deepest personal betrayal imaginable. What can we do? Yes. We can file for an emergency hearing to have you evaluated for competency. If you're found competent, and based on our conversation I believe you will be, we can revoke the power of attorney and get you out of there. But Mrs. Mayfield, I need to warn you. This will likely destroy your relationship with your son permanently. I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Jason as a little boy, crying in my arms after his father's funeral. Thinking about graduation day when he walked across the stage and found my face in the crowd. His smile bright with achievement and gratitude. Thinking about all the years I'd defined myself through his success. His happiness, his needs. Mrs. Reeves, I said finally. He destroyed that relationship the moment he decided I was more valuable to him as a possession than as a person. The legal process moved quickly once it began. Monica was efficient, thorough, and absolutely merciless in her pursuit of justice. The competency evaluation was conducted by a court-appointed psychologist who spent 2 hours with me, testing my memory, my reasoning, my understanding of my situation and my finances. Mrs. Mayfield, she said at the end of our session, I want to be clear. There is absolutely nothing wrong with your mental capacity. You are as competent as any adult I've evaluated. The question isn't whether you can make your own decisions. It's why someone decided you couldn't. The emergency hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in mid-October. Jason was required to appear, along with his attorney. Apparently, he'd hired one the moment he received the court summons. When I saw him across the courtroom, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Love because he was still my child. Disappointment because he'd proven himself capable of such calculated cruelty. And something harder to name. A kind of grief for the son I'd thought I had, the son who would never have done this to me. He looked older, more haggard than when I'd last seen him. Danielle wasn't with him, which I found interesting. Apparently, this scheme wasn't going as smoothly as they'd planned. The judge, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense, reviewed the case quickly and efficiently. She listened to Jason's attorney argue that I was a danger to myself, that the fainting spell indicated serious health issues, that I needed supervision and care. Then she listened to Monica present the evidence. My clean medical records, the testimony of neighbors who'd interacted with me regularly and found me completely competent, the suspicious timing of the power of attorney activation, and the evidence that Jason had already begun using my assets for his own benefit. Mr. Mayfield, the judge said, addressing Jason directly, can you explain to the court why you activated a power of attorney immediately following your mother's minor medical episode, particularly when medical professionals found no evidence of cognitive impairment? I watched Jason struggle to answer. He mumbled something about being concerned, about wanting to be proactive, about thinking it was temporary. And can you explain why you moved into your mother's house and began accessing her bank accounts if this arrangement was meant to be temporary? The silence that followed was damning. The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. The power of attorney was revoked immediately. I was to be released from Sunset Manor that day. Jason was ordered to provide a full accounting of any money he'd spent from my accounts, and to vacate my house within 48 hours. But the legal victory, satisfying as it was only the beginning of what I had planned. I returned to my house that Thursday afternoon to find it in a state that broke my heart and fueled my determination in equal measure. Jason and Danielle had been living there for almost 2 months, and they treated my home like a hotel room. My carefully maintained garden was overgrown and neglected. Several of my prize roses had died from lack of water. Inside, my furniture had been rearranged. My personal belongings had been boxed up and stored in the basement, and there was evidence everywhere of a life being lived by people who had no respect for the space they occupied. The financial damage was significant. Jason had spent nearly $30,000 from my accounts, money he'd used to pay off credit card debt, make car payments, and fund what appeared to be a rather expensive lifestyle for himself and Danielle. Monica assured me we could recover most of it through legal action. but that would take time. More devastating was the discovery, in Jason's hasty packing, of documents that revealed the full scope of their planning. They'd been discussing this for months, maybe longer. There were emails between Jason and Danielle talking about when Mom is out of the picture, and once we have access to her money. There were real estate listings they'd been reviewing, presumably to sell my house once they'd gained full control. But the most damaging discovery was a draft will that Jason had prepared. A will that left everything to him and deliberately excluded Tyler, my grandson, from any inheritance. Tyler, who was only 16 and had no idea what his father had been planning. Tyler, who loved me unconditionally and who had been asking his father for weeks when he could visit me. That's when I knew that legal victory wasn't enough. I needed something more comprehensive, more permanent. I needed to ensure that Jason could never again put me or anyone else in this position. The house next door to mine had been for sale for months. It was a lovely property, slightly smaller than mine but with a clear view of my front yard and garden. The asking price was reasonable, and I had the resources to purchase it outright. I called the realtor that Friday morning. "Mrs. Henderson, I'd like to make an offer on 447 Maple Street." "Oh, wonderful. Are you relocating to the area?" "Actually, I live at 445 Maple Street. I'm buying the house next door." There was a pause. "May I ask why?" "Privacy," I said simply. I moved into my new house the following month, selling my original home to a lovely young family with 2 small children who promised to care for the roses. From my new kitchen window, I had a perfect view of their backyard, their comings and goings, their attempts to rebuild their life after their scheme had collapsed. It was fascinating to watch the disintegration. Danielle left Jason within a week of the court ruling. Apparently, her interest in him had been directly tied to his prospects as an heir, and without access to my money, those prospects had dimmed considerably. She took their shared car and most of their belongings, leaving Jason to face the consequences of his actions alone. Jason struggled to find stable housing. The money he'd spent from my accounts had been supporting a lifestyle well beyond his actual means, and without that cushion, he couldn't afford the rent on the apartment they'd been planning to move to after selling my house. He ended up in a small efficiency apartment across town, working extra shifts to pay back the legal fees and the money he owed me. But the most satisfying part wasn't his financial struggles. It was watching him realize that his actions had consequences beyond money. His reputation in our small community was ruined. People who had known our family for decades now looked at him with disgust and suspicion. The story of what he'd done to me had spread, as stories do in small towns, and he found himself socially isolated and professionally damaged. I meanwhile was thriving. My new house was perfect for my needs, smaller and easier to maintain, but with a beautiful garden space where I could start fresh with new roses. I'd become something of a local celebrity, the woman who'd fought back against elder abuse and won. People sought my advice, my story, my perspective on how to protect themselves and their loved ones from similar situations. I started volunteering with Monica's law firm, helping other elderly clients understand their rights and options. I spoke at community centers and churches about the warning signs of elder abuse. I became an advocate, using my experience to help others avoid the trap I'd fallen into. Tyler came to live with me during his senior year of high school. Jason, overwhelmed by his own problems and perhaps feeling genuinely remorseful, agreed that it would be best for Tyler to have stability during this crucial time. Tyler was angry with his father, confused by the family drama, but grateful to have a safe space with someone who loved him unconditionally. Having Tyler in the house brought me more joy than I'd experienced in years. He helped me plant new roses, learned to cook my grandmother's recipes, and spent evenings telling me about his plans for college and his dreams for the future. He was everything Jason had once been, before life and disappointment and greed had twisted him into someone I barely recognized. It was Tyler who finally convinced me to reach out to Jason, about a year after the court ruling. "Grandma, I know what Dad did was terrible, but he's still my father and I think he might be ready to apologize for real." I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it, but I agreed to meet with Jason at a neutral location, A coffee shop downtown where we couldn't make a scene and where our conversation would necessarily be brief and public. He looked terrible. Thinner, older, worn down by the consequences of his choices. When he sat down across from me, I could see genuine remorse in his eyes for the first time since this whole ordeal began. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know how to forgive myself. What I did to you was inexcusable." I let him talk. I let him explain how financial pressure had made him desperate, how Danielle had pushed him toward more aggressive solutions, how he'd convinced himself that he was doing what was best for everyone. None of it excused his actions, but it helped me understand how he'd traveled so far from the boy I'd raised. "Jason," I said when he finished, "I loved you enough to sacrifice everything for you, but I loved you wrong. I never taught you that love has limits, that gratitude has responsibilities, that family loyalty works both ways. I know that now. Do you? Because here's what I need you to understand. I will never trust you again. I will never put myself in a position where you can hurt me again. But I will also never stop loving you, because that's not something I know how to do." It wasn't reconciliation exactly, but it was a beginning. Jason moved away shortly after that conversation, taking a job in another state where his reputation hadn't preceded him. He writes to me sometimes, brief letters that update me on his life and express ongoing remorse for what he put me through. I write back equally brief responses that acknowledge his efforts to rebuild his life while maintaining clear boundaries about what our relationship can and cannot be. Tyler graduated high school with honors and went on to college with scholarships and funds I'd set aside for his education, funds that Jason had never been able to access or spend. He visits during breaks, helps me with yard work, and brings friends around who are always charmed by his grandmother who took down the system and reclaimed her life. I'm in my 70s now, living in my beautiful small house with my thriving garden and my community of friends and fellow advocates. I have meaningful work, financial security, and the deep satisfaction that comes from turning a painful experience into something useful for others. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the way I handled things with Jason. They suggest that perhaps I was too harsh, too unforgiving, too focused on punishment rather than healing. They remind me that he's my son, that family should forgive, that holding grudges only hurts the grudge holder. But I've learned something important about forgiveness in these past few years. Forgiveness doesn't require you to make yourself vulnerable to the same hurt again. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending that serious harm wasn't done. And forgiveness certainly doesn't mean abandoning consequences for the person who harmed you. I have forgiven Jason in my heart for what he did to me. But I have also learned to forgive myself for the ways I enabled his selfishness, for the ways I confused love with sacrifice, for the ways I failed to teach him that other people, including his mother, have value beyond what they can provide for him. My roses bloom more beautifully now than they ever did before. I've learned new varieties, experimented with different growing techniques, and created a garden that brings me daily joy. People often comment on how lovely they are, how impressive it is that someone my age can maintain such a demanding hobby. I always tell them the same thing. Roses teach you that the most beautiful blooms come from the strongest roots, and sometimes the strongest roots grow best in soil that's been disturbed, turned over, and enriched with new nutrients. Sometimes the most beautiful things in life grow from the harshest cuts.
Thank you for reading Dolores' story. If you or someone you know is experiencing elder abuse, please reach out to your local adult protective services or contact the National Center on Elder Abuse. Remember, every older adult deserves dignity, respect, and the right to make their own decisions about their life and care. If this story resonated with you, please consider sharing it, liking this video, and subscribing for more true stories of resilience and justice. Your support helps us continue to share these important stories and raise awareness about elder rights and abuse prevention. What would you have done in Dolores' situation? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to treat your elders with the love and respect they deserve. Until next time, take care of each other.